Donald John Trump is looking at a scenario where he might be sent to prison, wherein his worst nightmare would come true. He would be forced to hang out with the kind of folks that voted for him. He has famously disparaged them. Donald Trump abhors the sort of folks that he relies on to pay his legal bills and to make him socially relevant at all. The MAGA types. And if you want real proof that he doesn't give a damn about them, how about he asks them to give up their lives and their livelihoods and their freedom in order to help him with a coup, because he is a sore loser. And when they did that, when they answered his call, effed up though it was, he didn't bail them out. He kept all the bailing out of folks, all the he said he'd pay their legal bills, he didn't do that. And he saved the pardons for his wealthy friends, his famous friends. If you want a pardon from Trump, you better have a podcast and with at least, let's say at least 100,000 followers. You got to have done a couple of spots on Fox News if you want to get a pardon from Trump. You better have a gold album out, because if you're a regular person, no, you don't get a pardon from Trump. Here's Ari Melber driving that home.
We're about 1 week out from the federal criminal arraignment that Trump did try to prevent. We all remember he was forced to sit silently in that Miami courtroom. Outside, cameras showed a very small crowd. The scene was nothing like what Trump had threatened for months. The talk of riots or unrest, or how the nation would not stand for his indictment. And I'll show you all that in this special report right now. We could also tell you that heading into the second arraignment, Trump posted the message, "See you in Miami," and he did some conservative media calling for protests, reinforcing ultimately how tiny his megaphone was on this score when it comes to summoning a giant crowd to protest a government proceeding.
Look, our country has to protest. We need strength at this point, and everyone's afraid to do anything. They're afraid to talk, and they have to go out and they have to protest peacefully.
Now, Miami police had security ready for a crowd that could top 50,000. And after what we all saw as an under-response to the January 6th gathering, that kind of prep could make sense. You prepare for the most or the worst, but
I don't know what the but's going to be there. Yes, 100%. That's what you do. Just for the record, there he was calling him to come down and participate in his coup. Credit where it's due, he said the word peaceful there. But on the day, he said, you got to fight like hell. Notice that those crowds are so much thinner. You guys have talked about this in the comments. That's because his most loyal people are serving time for him right now. The people that might have turned up to that thing. A big chunk of them got arrested for doing exactly that and doing what he would have wanted. Violence in his name. I wonder how they're going to feel about him when he goes to prison. It can't go well for Trump. If let's say they hate him, well, then that's going to go real bad for him. And the irony is the sort of thing that they write plays about. It's also not going to go well if they love him, because there's nothing Donald Trump despises more than gross MAGA types. You know, your QAnon shamans, your small business owners, those types. somebody's boss, and usually a bad boss, but not a truly rich person, not a famous person. He can't stand those types. And those people being able to demand his attention constantly, oh, it'll be hell for him.
One point that got less attention at last week's arraignment was the meager turnout of just about 500 people. No signs of militias or apparent hardliners like those who showed up for the criminal insurrection. The number of Trump supporters was sometimes literally dwarfed by the number of media present. You could see that in certain scenes. And there was talk of how Trump drew a fizzled response and really something that boiled down to a circus-like crowd, as the New York Times put it, including a Trump backer walking around and then another Trump critic carrying.
Look at that guy. Anybody that would dress up like that disgusts Donald Trump.
A pig head on an actual spike. The low turnout had MAGA supporters contemplating who among them might be federal agents. And you take this together now, we've all been through it, we've taken a breath, and you may say, okay, well, that's a standard outcome, even a less than newsworthy outcome, so what more is there to say? Well, there's a reason why this is our top story tonight and our special report, because there's a lot more behind the scenes. Donald Trump's failure to get anywhere near another January 6th action is not only a good thing for public safety and for the justice system. It is very much not a standard outcome that Donald Trump or his allies vowed to achieve. So it's actually worth noting how we got here, why this matters tonight, because even self-proclaimed serious people like Senator Lindsey Graham was out there vowing riots. Now, he was wrong about what would happen. He was also wrong to use this rhetoric to apparently threaten the justice system's operation with the fear of riots. Graham, a former military lawyer, is supposed to know better.
And I'll say this. If there's a prosecution of Donald Trump for mishandling classified information after the Clinton debacle, which you presided over and did a hell of a good job, there'll be riots in the streets.
It is 3 times Trump has tried to summon people to protest the justice system and failed to get any kind of large gathering, let alone another insurrection-type gathering. It's a glaring contrast to the people he brought to D.C. and infamously hurled at the Capitol in the actual sedition, which overran police, which was criminally effective at breaching the Capitol.
I like that phrase, hurled at the Capitol. That's a good way to put it. Look at the folks in there. You ever seen Donald Trump hanging out with folks that wear, what are those, like a road worker's hoodie? Look at the, well, there's a black guy there, so I haven't actually seen Donald Trump hanging out with a whole lot of black folks in a non-professional capacity. Guy with the leather cowboy hat. Look, it's not me caring about aesthetics. I'm talking about what Trump cares about. Trump obsesses over that. He didn't want to hire John Bolton because the man had one redeeming feature, which is a glorious mustache. I truly hope we get the special irony. I hope the film on Donald Trump ends with the slow zoom out as he's surrounded by yakking maniacs who are rattling off their QAnon theories, and he realizes this will be the rest of his days. I'm looking forward to that.
And that crowd, if you're wondering about just the numbers, we checked, far
10,000?
larger than these gatherings we just touched on. It was about 10,000, including many vigilantes and now convicted criminals who were following the literal calls to overthrow that peaceful transfer of power and the election Trump lost. Trump demanded their attendance, and what he billed was a wild gathering that, fueled by election lies, his use of the debate stage to embrace the now convicted Proud Boys militia. Law enforcement and journalists found that all of what Trump did there, which is very similar to what he tried to do this time, in a very real way, it energized extremist groups. It operated and radicalized some political supporters and turned them into people willing to storm the Capitol. And that threat of violence does not function on its own. Trump has tried to summon the fear of another January 6th, quite literally to intimidate the very prosecutors now doing these cases. and to kind of try to corrupt the DOJ from the outside.
Listen to what he said. I had a whole rant about this. I was advised by wise people to chill out a little bit, give it a little more time. But I'll touch on it lightly. Ari Melber just described what Trump tried to do surrounding these indictments as being very much like what he tried to do before January 6th. Now, just because our Department of Justice has failed us doesn't mean that we are required then to pretend like we're morons. The people in charge of investigating this know what a threat domestic terrorism is, specifically right-wing domestic terrorism. You know, once upon a time, there were left-wing domestic terrorists, and these were not good people either. Just because I would have agreed with what they wanted to eventually have happen in some cases does not mean I agreed with their methods. But that was a thing once upon a time, and we're talking about mid-70s. Since the days of Reagan, we have had right-wing terrorism. And even a fraction of what these people have done, I'm talking the Oklahoma City bombing, I'm talking Waco, I'm talking Cesar Sayoc mailing bombs to politicians, I'm talking the Wolverine Watchman, to my undying shame in my own state, trying to kidnap the governor. Zero her out. Even a fraction of what they've done is far worse than the absolute worst things the left-wing domestic terrorists ever did. You want to know what the left-wing terrorists did? They robbed banks. Kind of stuff right-wingers praise in their own weird way. They burned down buildings when nobody was in them. People in charge of investigating this know what a danger it is when Donald Trump calls people out to this. And I do not think it is wise for us to fail to learn from all the times in the past we have chosen to pretend like everything's fine in the hope that it will make everything fine. It does not work that way. And in particular, it does not work that way with these people. I had a whole Jack Smith rant. I'm going to set it aside. Because truthfully, it's my members here are wise folks. And they made a good point, which is, I'm not a lawman in any way, shape, or form, and Jack Smith is, and maybe he knows something I don't, and okay. He's done a pretty solid job so far. He's earned a little bit of leeway, but I'll tell you, he hasn't earned all that much. Because the Justice Department in the United States has had second, third, fourth, and fifth chances to get it right, and they failed every time. But we should not be patient with these folks, and we should not, in my opinion, allow Donald Trump to keep posting these things. There should be, in some form, I feel, a court order preventing this, acknowledging that it's a danger to you and me. It's a danger to anybody working at any of the places he has been indicted and will continue to be indicted, because he's done a whole hell of a lot of crimes, it would seem. Just a thought.
I mentioned this once before on our show, but I want to bring this to our attention right now, thinking about those fizzled crowds, because we had that search at Mar-a-Lago. We didn't even know publicly then how bad it was and how much evidence was found at the time. It came out over time. But Trump, after that, dispatched an ally to pass along a secret back channel message. Trump wanted Attorney General Garland to know people around the country were enraged by the search, and Trump added, according to a New York Times report, a kind of mafia-style threat to Garland. The country is on fire. What can I do to reduce the heat? Trump was suggesting that he had the power to do that he could either reduce the heat or, if Garland didn't play ball, increase the heat. Now, that may sound quite brazen for someone literally under investigation by DOJ for that very approach to attacking the Capitol and a kind of legal review over whether he was turning up the heat in a way that could be charged. But early on, remember, DOJ officials were actually afraid of even mentioning or probing Trump over that very Jan 6th attack.
Get him, Ari.
You're looking at that Washington Post report, which is new this week, a bombshell that showed there were fears there. And you take that all together, and you can see that while we can't read anyone's mind, the public pressure, the private back channeling, the very real recent trauma and lived history of that attack all combines to sort of potentially strengthen the hand of someone who should be just a citizen, just a subject of a probe, and now recently just a defendant. But you have Trump's secret pressure with the public attacks. That is the framework that is much larger than Trump. It is an increasingly authoritarian playbook trying to end America's rule of law that Trump has been leading across the wider Republican Party. Since DOJ has indicted now over 1,000 people in connection with January 6th, 570 convictions from guilty pleas. That's like no fight, no contest. And the defendants who tried their luck at trial are losing badly. 78 found guilty, convicted by a jury of their peers at trial. Now, there are still questions over whether that January 6th probe will go to the top. Will it reach the elites or the political lawyers and insiders who weren't physically on the ground that day? But the deterrence is already working because it is obvious that foot soldiers are getting busted and facing real prison time. Oath Keepers founder and January 6th leader Stuart Rhodes got 18 years for sedition. One of his co-conspirators got 12. Just today, we can update you with a report on the rioter who brutally tased an officer in those clashes, got over 12 years in prison. That's hard time and it's hard facts. And while Trump may try to lie or minimize the consequences of this or the awareness of this to his supporters, who do seem to hang on sometimes his every word, well, the word is still getting out in MAGA circles. To give you just one example, there's a lawyer for January 6 defendants, which is a pretty hardline group, warning publicly, if you want to demonstrate at these arraignments and other things, quote, you must proceed with caution. Garland wants throngs of arrests. Now, for context, I can mention that lawyer also is trying to spin the warning into an allegation that there's unjust prosecution at DOJ. But the core point and reality also comes through. Even an advocate and a defender of these January 6 defendants, and they have the right to counsel, is making the point that you will get arrested and you could get convicted. And if you get convicted, you will be in prison.
On a quick side note, I think that's an interesting message, or rather an interesting lesson in messaging to these folks. Now, that person is playing into the idea that they're playing into the frankly the conspiracy theory that what Garland wants is you know what, is it a conspiracy theory? That is what Garland wants. He wants to impress the American public with the number of people he gets and use that as an excuse to say he took it seriously. And we've seen we've seen evidence that he failed to take steps to go after the organizers. So that might not actually, I might have been wrong in my first thought on that. That might just be a harsh truth. But I find that lower third very interesting. Prison deters MAGA vigilantes. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Can you imagine what it would do if we actually put the person that sent them there in prison? So all I wanted to point out there is that the worst possible fate for first of all, okay, I definitely wanted to point out that having the law applied to them has an effect on right-wingers. more so than words. With a lefty, they will happily go to prison and join others who have gone to prison and flood the system with inmates over words. Because on the left, it's principles that are appealed to. But on the right, at least from what I've seen, it would appear that the principles are defined by consequences alone. In other words, they will decide what is right or wrong based on their perceived gain or loss. And a lot of folks that saw people go to prison over January 6th suddenly started having the opinion, oh, well, you've got to be, you can't act a fool at these things, you know. Suddenly that's their opinion. But the other point, and I think the funnier point, which I want to end with here, is that Donald Trump's worst nightmare, his version of hell, is to be surrounded by the very people he conned. And I think we should give that gift to the world. Put Donald Trump in the very same prison that all these January 6ers are being sent to. Because he deserves it. On many levels.